Look at you crying already. 35 miles is nothing. Maybe the rain will rinse the attitude off. My father's voice was light, almost playful. Like he was teasing a child, not abandoning his daughter on a county road with no shoulder and a sky tearing itself open. The first drop slid down the bridge of my nose. Then a sheet followed, cold, needly relentless. The gravel at the edge of the asphalt turned to slurry, swallowing my sneakers as if the earth itself wanted me gone. Headlights ghosted by in the distance, indifferent. My breath fogged. My hands shook. My phone sat black in my pocket, useless and deliberate. He'd made sure of that. No battery, no wallet, just a lesson. I didn't chase the taillights. I didn't beg. I watched the red dots shrink and vanish, like a door clicking shut on a room I'd slept in my whole life. Hi everyone. My name is Marin Vale and I learned to keep my face still a long time ago. The kind of still that makes people think you're fine when your ribs are a birdcage rattling in a hurricane. I grew up with rules that moved like goalposts, with love braided into control, with apologies that always came with an invoice. So when he said I needed a lesson, I already knew the curriculum. Humiliation, fear, silence, and how to pass by not letting him see me break. The rain needled my scalp. I could taste metal in the water, the sky's static settling on my tongue. I stepped off the road and stood beneath a lonely billboard for a storage company, its cartoon key smiling with dimples. The ink ran down the sign's face like mascara. I let the night breathe around me. Frogs croaked in the ditch like somebody's bad joke. Wind combed the field and lifted the hair off my neck. My father's car was gone. The quiet after cruelty is never quiet. It hisses. I thought about every time he'd said, "Strong women don't whine," and how he'd define whining as anything that sounded like a boundary. I thought about the way he would laugh when I said no, as if my mouth had mispronounced a simpler word. I pictured him at home, already warm, self-satisfied, telling my mother I'd be back softer, smaller, grateful. That's when the black truck turned onto the shoulder, slow and sure, tires whispering on wet grit. The driver's door opened and a tall silhouette stepped into the rain, coat unbothered, posture like a promise. "Miss Vale," he said calm. "Ready? Let's go." I climbed in without wiping my face. Heat rolled around me, steady as a hand on my back. In the side mirror, the storm wrote white slashes across the road like tally marks. My father believed in lessons. He just enrolled in mine. The final course. No retakes, graded on mercy I no longer owed. As the door latched, thunder applauded, low and patient like a gavel coming down. The hum of the truck's heater wrapped around my bones like a blanket pulled from a mother's arms I never had. My bodyguard, Elias, kept his eyes forward, both hands steady on the wheel. His jaw was cut stone, unreadable, but I knew the silence was deliberate. He understood something my father never would. Not every wound wants words. Sometimes it just wants space to breathe. Water traced patterns down the windshield, blurring the world into smears of silver. My heart still beat in the rhythm of abandonment, fast, uneven, betrayed. I pressed my palm against the heater vent, chasing away the shiver that had settled too deep. "Did he really leave you here?" Elias finally asked. His voice was low, like a man who already knew the answer but wanted to give me the dignity of saying it aloud. I nodded once. My throat was raw from holding back. He didn't push. The miles began to fall away. Headlights brushed over endless fields. Rain-swollen ditches swallowed pieces of the night. Every turn of the tires felt like we were crossing not just distance, but something heavier. Years of silence, years of control, years of me believing cruelty was just parenting sharpened by discipline. When we reached a crossroads, Elias slowed. "Do you want to go home?" he asked. The word home split inside me. It meant a house I knew like the lines on my palm, but never a place that knew me back. I turned toward the window. The storm's reflection stared back, fierce and cold. "No," I whispered for the first time. His eyes flicked to me. No pity, only respect. A soldier's recognition of another fighter. He pressed the accelerator. Somewhere behind us, my father was already telling the story of how he taught me a lesson. He wouldn't know that his voice had become background noise, fading like rain on the roof. Because tonight, the student he tried to break was writing her own curriculum. And the first chapter began the moment I said no. The truck carried me forward, but for him time had already stopped. The rain softened to a whisper, but inside me the storm raged on. Elias's headlights carved tunnels through the wet dark, each beam a lifeline pulling me further from the man who thought he owned my soul. I sat rigid, hands clasped in my lap, fingers aching from how tightly I held myself together. "Where do you want to go?" Elias asked, steady like it didn't matter how far. I thought of all the places I'd once dreamed of escaping to. Cities where no one knew my name, apartments with doors that locked from the inside, kitchens that smelled of bread instead of control. But tonight I only wanted one thing: distance. "Anywhere but back there," I said. Elias gave a short nod as if he'd been waiting for that exact answer. He turned off the main road, guiding us toward the interstate. The tires hummed constant, soothing. I watched raindrops race each other down the glass. Behind me was a man who believed abandonment was education. Who believed daughters were clay to be shaped by cruelty. Who believed silence was obedience. For years I let him. Tonight he would learn how wrong he was. "Do you want me to call someone?" Elias asked gently. A bitter laugh scraped my throat. "Who? My mother? She'd just tell me to understand him better. My brother? He's his echo. There's no one." "Then there's me," Elias said simply. No oath, no flourish. Just fact. Something shifted in me then. Not relief, not yet, but the smallest crack in the dam. I let my head fall back against the seat. The leather smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth and pine. My body exhaled years of air I hadn't realized I was holding. In that quiet, an image bloomed. My father's face when he realized his control had slipped like sand through his fingers. That day was coming, and it would not arrive in shouting matches or slammed doors. It would arrive like this night had, silent, inevitable, devastating. I closed my eyes. The road stretched ahead. My revenge had just taken its first breath. By the time we reached the interstate, the rain had thinned to a mist, a faint silver curtain trailing off into nothing. Streetlights appeared every few miles, glowing halos in the fog. Each one felt like a checkpoint, a marker whispering, "You are farther. You are freer." Elias drove with the patience of a man who knew danger often followed from behind. His gaze flicked to the mirrors, scanning alert. He didn't speak again until my breathing had evened out, as if he was waiting for my storm to settle before adding his voice. "What do you want to do, Marin?" he asked. The question sank deeper than it should have. For years, my answers had been trained into me. What my father wanted me to do, who he wanted me to be, how small he wanted me to fit. To be asked, "What do you want?" was so foreign it almost hurt. I swallowed. "I want him to feel what I felt tonight." Elias didn't flinch. "Abandoned. Small," I said. My voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut. "I want him to know silence isn't power, it's emptiness. I want him to look around and realize no one's standing with him anymore." The truck's engine purred. His grip on the wheel tightened ever so slightly, but he said nothing. He understood. We passed a road sign. City limits 12 miles. The glow of it lingered in my chest like a promise. I thought of my father at home already spinning his version of the night. Maybe he'd pour himself a drink, boast about tough love, and laugh at the thought of me crying alone in the rain. He wouldn't know the truth. I wasn't crying anymore. He thought he had driven away, leaving me stranded. But it was me who had left him behind, 35 miles and a lifetime away. The storm outside was ending. The one inside me was just beginning. And when it broke, he would finally learn the lesson he had written for himself. The city lights spilled across the horizon like a necklace of fire, each bulb flickering against the wet pavement. Elias steered us into its glow, calm as a man walking into a story he already knew the ending to. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool window, watching neon signs blur into streaks of color. For the first time in years, I wasn't being watched, judged, or measured. I was just me, and the weight of that freedom was almost unbearable. We pulled into a quiet diner on the edge of town, its red sign buzzing, half the letters dead. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried onions wrapped around me, warm, ordinary, healing in its simplicity. Elias slid into the booth across from me, hands folded, posture precise. "Food first," he said. "Plans second." The waitress poured steaming coffee and I wrapped my fingers around the mug. The heat seeped into me, undoing the chill my father had planted. I stared at the dark liquid before whispering, "He'll twist it, you know. By morning he'll tell everyone I stormed off, that I disrespected him." Elias's gaze met mine steady. "Doesn't matter what he says. What matters is what you do next." The words landed like anchors. I thought of every family dinner where my father's version of reality drowned mine out. Every story retold until I couldn't recognize myself in it anymore. But this time I held the truth, and the silence of being ignored no longer scared me. "I want out," I said finally. "Not just of the house, of his shadow." Elias gave a single nod, the kind soldiers give when orders are clear. Then we make sure he never stands tall enough to cast it again. The rain had stopped completely now. Outside the diner's fogged windows, the night was clearing, a faint star peeking through thinning clouds. For the first time I wasn't thinking about how far my father had left me. I was thinking about how far I could go without him. And that distance would become the sharpest blade of all. Morning crept in quietly, the sky painted in pale grays and hesitant pinks. I hadn't slept. Elias had dozed in the booth for an hour, but I sat awake with the coffee mug between my palms, tracing the rim like it could draw a map to the future. When he opened his eyes, he looked at me like he already knew, like he could read the resolve etched into my face. "You're ready," he said. Not a question. I nodded. I'm done letting him decide who I am. But I don't want screaming or broken doors. I want him to watch his world shrink piece by piece, until he realizes I was the foundation all along. Elias leaned forward. "Then we use what he values most against him. Respect, appearances, his reputation." The word reputation flared in my chest. My father thrived on control, but what he fed on was admiration. The image of a stern, disciplined man who raised strong children. If that mask cracked in front of the right people, he'd have nothing left. We drove as the city woke up. Commuters spilled onto streets, bakeries opened shutters, newspapers hit wet pavement. I watched it all pass and felt myself sharpening. At a stoplight, Elias spoke again. "He believes silence is your weakness. Show him it's your weapon." I let the thought settle. Silence had been my prison, but it could be my revenge. Not rage, not argument, just absence. My presence removed from his life. My voice telling the truth to ears that mattered. My calm refusal to play the role he'd written. When we stopped outside a small apartment complex, Elias turned to me. "This can be your place. Papers, lease, protection, I'll handle it. You just need to decide what to say when he comes looking." The weight of choice pressed against me. But it wasn't heavy. It was freedom disguised as fear. I stepped out of the truck. The air was crisp and new, smelling faintly of wet concrete and jasmine. I wasn't just 35 miles away anymore. I was in a new orbit, and my father was about to learn what emptiness truly meant. The apartment was small. One bedroom with peeling paint and a humming fridge that sounded like it was fighting to stay alive. But to me it was a palace. Walls that didn't echo with his voice. A key that belonged only to me. A silence that wasn't punishment but choice. Elias carried in a box of basics. Clothes, documents, a spare phone already charged. "It's not much," he said, setting it down. "It's everything," I whispered. My voice cracked, not from weakness but from the shock of finally breathing air that wasn't laced with his shadow. By the second day the calls began. Unknown numbers lit the screen, voicemails filled with his voice. "Where are you? Come home. Don't embarrass me like this. You'll regret it." Each message dripped the same arrogance. Less worry for me, more fury at losing control. I didn't answer. That was my power now. That is, I started talking, quietly, carefully, with people who had once looked at him like he was a pillar. Old family friends, colleagues from the club, even my aunt who had long stopped visiting because of how tense things always got. I told them exactly what happened that night. How he left me 35 miles from home in pouring rain with no phone, no wallet, nothing but a lesson. Their silence on the line told me enough. Respect doesn't survive truth. It rots under it. By the week's end the stories were spreading. My father's voice, once commanding in every room, began to sound brittle. I knew because his messages grew frantic. Commands giving way to pleading, threats folding into apologies that didn't know how to form. One night Elias stood by the window watching the street below while I replayed the newest voicemail. My father's words were jagged, desperate. "He's unraveling," Elias said. I leaned against the counter, calm. Good. Let him feel the silence. Because silence wasn't absence anymore. It was a mirror, and my father was finally forced to hear his own cruelty echo back. He thought he had abandoned me. He never realized that all this time it had been him left behind. 2 weeks later I stood outside the house I once called home. The paint looked duller, the windows darker, as if the walls themselves had absorbed his unraveling. Elias waited in the truck at the curb, giving me space. This was my moment, not his. I rang the bell. It took longer than it ever had for my father to answer. When the door swung open, he seemed smaller, not in body but in presence. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed red. The man who once loomed now looked caved in. "Marin," he said, relief and anger wrestling in his tone. "You've made your point. Come back. Let's forget all this." I stepped past the threshold, but not into the house. My voice was calm, measured. "Forget you left me in the rain 35 miles from home? You thought silence would break me. It broke you instead." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "People know now," I said. "They know who you are when no one's watching, and they're watching more closely than you think." His face blanched, his practiced authority slipped like sand through his fingers. For the first time he had nothing to say. I took the spare key from my pocket, the one he'd given me with a lecture about responsibility, and I placed it on the doorstep. The metal clinked like a gavel. "This isn't my home anymore," I said. "And I'm not your lesson. You're mine." The words landed heavier than any scream could. I turned and walked back to the truck. Elias opened the door as I climbed in. I didn't look back. Through the windshield I watched my father clutch the doorframe, swallowed by a silence that finally belonged to him. I breathed in the air, crisp, clean, and felt the storm inside me dissolve into something steadier. Betrayal had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. He wanted control, I gave him emptiness. He wanted obedience, I gave him truth. And in that quiet, my freedom spoke louder than his voice ever had.